introduce Brandon Sanderson and Harriet Dougal, but before I do, I have a couple of announcements. Firstly, the obligatory, please silence your cell phones. I'm going to do the same. I'd like to remind everyone that no flash photography is allowed during tonight's lecture. Following the event, a book signing will take place upstairs in the lobby. Don't forget that most of our author event programs are offered as free podcasts at freelibrary.org/author events, where you can listen to your favorites or catch up with those you might have missed. So, welcome to the Free Library of Philadelphia. My name is Bruce Fenton. I'm one of the library's supporters, and I am delighted to be here tonight. Our guests will come to the stage shortly, but before they do, I'd like to encourage you to browse the wonderful digital media we have online at freelibrary.org. From ebooks to free downloadable MP3s, audiobooks, and movies, freelibrary.org has plenty to offer when you can't make it to your local neighborhood library. To help support the library's resources, like our growing digital collection, through the Free Library of Philadelphia Foundation, please visit freelibrary.org/support. As I said earlier, tonight I have the privilege of introducing Harriet McDougall and Brandon Sanderson. Harriet's late husband, Robert Jordan, was author of the best-selling multi-volume epic fantasy series, The Wheel of Time. I'm sure you all know that. Should I say it again? Wheel of Time? Anybody? Yeah, okay. Following Mr. Jordan's passing in 2007, Harriet recruited best-selling fantasy novelist Brandon Sanderson to use Robert Jordan's extensive drafts and notes to complete the series with the final 3 books, The Gathering Storm, Towers of Midnight, and A Memory of Light. A creative writing teacher at Brigham Young University, Brandon Sanderson is the author of more than a dozen books, including Elantris, the Mistborn series, the Alcatraz series, Warbreaker, and my personal favorite, The Way of Kings. A Memory of Light is the 14th and final volume in the Grand Wheel of Time saga. Stephen Hubbard writes in BookReporter.com that it is no exaggeration to say that A Memory of Light is epic in all ways. In size, in the scope of the tale and the cast involved, in depth, and as a finale, it is epic in weight on an emotional level, from what is presented in words and from what readers carry with them over 20 years. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Harriet McDougall and Brandon Sanderson.
Thanks for that. First thing I'm going to do is apologize if you hear me making licking noises. I've got lozenges that I'm chewing on because this has been a long tour and my throat is disagreeing with me, so I apologize for that. About 23 years ago, this spring, I walked into my local little bookstore, Cosmic Comics it was called. They sold comic books, magic cards, and fantasy novels, which made it quite the hangout for me. I wandered in, and I can actually still remember it. It's one of those memories, that gets burned into your mind. They had this little shelf of new releases, and on the bottom shelf in new releases was a really big book. Now, I like big books, okay? I had learned by then that, length isn't an indication of quality, right? But if you found a big book that you really liked, it kept going. If you got a short book that you really liked, it was done by the time that you figured out you liked it. So I always looked for the big ones, right? I had discovered fantasy novels the summer before. just before the end of my 8th grade year, I had a teacher. Her name was Ms. Reeder, coincidentally. Yes, she's actually a professor at UC Irvine right now. And she had given me my first fantasy novel. I had not been a reader. A lot of authors you'll talk to, like they started reading and started writing books when they were like, 3 years old. They composed their first masterpiece, right? All this stuff. I wasn't that. I hated books. As a kid, people kept trying to give me books, and I joke about this, but it's really true. Every book they gave me was about some boy who had a pet dog. What happens? You know what happens, right? The dog dies every time. I'm like, what? This is supposed to make me like reading. This is, number one, it's boring. And number two, the dog always dies. And so I didn't like books. I didn't like reading. And Ms. Reeder, she knew this, and she knew that being the somewhat quick-witted and lazy boy that I was, I had found out that I could just read the backs of books and get a summary somewhere and do my book reports without ever actually reading the book. And so she forced me to go pick one of her books. Now, English teachers, they have like these ratty shelves full of paperbacks, right? And they're like, a dozen kids have read, and they're like stained with spaghetti sauce or whatever, things like that. She took me back to her rack there, and she said, you gotta pick one of these that I have read, and you're gonna do your book report on that book, and then I'll know if you've read it or not. And I'm like, okay. So I started looking through the smallest ones first. They all looked boring, and like, oh, there's a dog on the cover, I know what happens in that book. And then I got to a book, and it was a bit bigger than the other ones, but there was something about it. It was Dragon's Bane by Barbara Hamlin. And it had this gorgeous cover, which had a dragon that seemed pretty cool to me. No dogs. A very pretty young woman that seemed like a good thing to me. And I gave it a try. And I fell in love. This book was amazing. It was awesome. I ran back to my teacher after reading this and said, wow, I can't believe people write books like this. And she's like, there's a whole library full of them. And I went to the school library and looked through the card catalog thinking, well, maybe other books like this one will have titles similar to it. And so the next card in line was a book called Dragonflight by Annie McCaffrey. And that was like, the nail in my coffin, so to speak. It's like, bam, last nail, you are now a fantasy reader for life. And I absolutely fell in love with the genre. Over the summer, people gave me, all my friends, who had started discovering fantasy books, and people that I knew gave me books. They gave me The Sword of Shannara. They gave me Pawn of Prophecy. They gave me all these wonderful, wonderful novels. But I had started searching. And here's the thing. All my friends had like these series that they'd liked reading, or people had given me and said, you need to read this. I wanted to find a series that I could share with people, right? Everything was was already done or in the middle or whatnot. I was actively thinking, okay, when am I going to find the series that is mine? So we see this big, fat, thick book here called Eye of the World. And I thought, well, I'll give this one a try. It was 1990. How many of you guys picked it up in 1990? Just out of curiosity. Wow, you guys have been waiting a long time. Yeah, I know how that feels. Well, I picked up this book, and I read this book, and I said, aha, I found it. It's really weird to kind of look back and think about how possessive I was of that novel, but we Wheel of Time fans are like that, right? We get kind of possessive. And it's so silly, but when the second book came out, and it came to my little bookstore in trade paperback, I said, aha! That means it's getting popular, and I noticed it before everyone else. And the third book came to my little bookstore. My bookstore did not order in many hardcovers. It was populated by 15-year-old boys. And, 15-year-old boys are not spending a lot on hardcovers. But the third book came, and they ordered the hardcover. And I said, aha! in my mind, that meant this is the first one to be published in hardcover because, of course, other books didn't exist and things. They'd all been in hardcover, but I just thought, well, obviously everyone's paying attention now, and now, of course, it goes to hardcover. I have spotted it, I became a Wheel of Time fan. I followed the Wheel of Time for years and years. Every time a new one came out, I would reread the whole series because that's what you did. I remember I had all the ups and downs that a Wheel of Time fan had, such as I remember when I found out that book 6 wasn't the last one. Yeah, you guys probably had moments like this where you're like, what? Wait a minute! I was told this was a 6-book series. I've still got like some of the books. If you'll read in the back occasionally, they'll say, Robert Jordan anticipates it being this long. Yeah. I think one of my book club editions, because I have a lot of them in paperback, and then book club hardcover, and then regular hardcover, which I can afford the regular hardcovers. I've got like 6 copies of I the World. Actually, I really do think I have 6 copies. Because I have the audiobook and the trade paperback. And so, anyway. Yeah, now digital. Yes, I do have the digital, and now the graphic novels are starting. So, and now I have the new covers and the trade paperbacks. Yeah. So many things to collect. And so, anyway, I followed these books along. A lot of the books that I had read, fortunately not some of the masterpieces like, Annie McCaffrey's books and stuff, but some that remain unmentioned, I would read them again in college and be like, ooh, right, that didn't hold up so well. Yeah. I don't know if you guys had this experience or not, but The Wheel of Time did. In fact, I remember reading as a kid, I would read the Wheel of Time books, and I would, Rand, Matt, and Perrin would be on their adventure, and there'd be like Moiraine oppressing them. And I'd be like, just let them do what they want to do, Moiraine. Stop keeping them down. They gotta go be free and be awesome. Then I remember reading the books as an adult at one point in my late 20s and being like, you stupid kids, listen to Moiraine. What's wrong with you? She's right. Oh, you stupid kids. There's depth to these books. They held up during my adult years. I was able to read them and see all the literary allusions and the mythological allusions that he had embedded in them they'd gone completely over my head when I was a kid. I didn't, I'm like 15. I didn't pick up Tom Marilyn was Merlin. I mean, come on. How obvious is it? But I never picked up on that. Yeah. Never picked up on that. Guinevere. No, that sort of stuff hit me like a punch in the face when I was in college. Let alone all the stuff that people are finding online, Usenet, Rec Art. Who was on Rec Arts? All whatever, Robert Jordan, a few of us. I lurked there for quite a while, and that's where I learned things like, the Mercedes symbol and stuff like this, like the real deep literary allusions that are in there. Perun, the Slavic god of the forge, and things like this. And, anyway, there was a lot there. Plus, there was the depth of the characters on different levels, the adult characters that I could empathize with. While I still liked all of the stupid teenagers who were doing stupid teenage stuff. But they were deep. In college, I decided I wanted to be a writer. I really decided this before that, but my mother convinced me that writers don't make any money, right? And that I should be a doctor. Because doctors get scholarships. And her thing was always like, hey, you know how doctors all go play golf? Well, instead of playing golf, you could write novels. And then you can actually feed your family, and you can have this hobby that you do. It'll be great. And so I ended up in chemistry my freshman year of college. Oh boy. They don't warn you. They don't warn you that in high school chemistry is all fun, blowing stuff up and liquid nitrogen and stuff. And then college, it's really just another word for math. They tricked me. And I spent a year in agony trying to get good grades in chemistry classes. Well, meanwhile, I was writing stories and having a blast. Sophomore year, before my sophomore year, I served a mission for the LDS Church. I went to Korea, and I'll tell you, I was so happy to be on a different continent for chemistry. It was just, yeah. But the thing I missed most was the writing. In fact, on my days off as a missionary, all the other missionaries would go play basketball. I would get out a notebook and start writing. And I started my first actual novel, not counting the one that I did as a teenager, which was basically a bad Dungeons and Dragons Tad Williams fanfic crossover. Though even my first real novel, I'll tell you, actually started with the wind scene, from Robert Jordan's books. I didn't think I was doing the wind scene, but that's just how you start a fantasy novel, right? I really, really, really deeply loved writing, and so I decided when I got back, I'm gonna be an English major, because that's what you do, right? That's how you become a writer. I changed my major to English, started taking all the creative writing classes I could get into. The problem was none of the teachers really knew how to teach me how to write. They can talk about writing, and they can encourage writing, but as good as even some of the professors were, none of them were writing for a career. And none of them were talking about things like, how to construct a plot, how to make characters that are sympathetic, how to do all these things that are important for writing a story that people really want to read. So I started studying The Wheel of Time. It became my textbook. I broke down the first 6 books and looked at their narrative structure. I looked at the sentences. I remember it's a weird thing, but I remember my mind being blown that he could use was together as repeated words. Because he anyway. There's these weird things that you learn when you're breaking down the sentences. I remember realizing, wow, just how someone views a cup of water in the Wheel of Time world, how they describe it, indicates how their personality, their character was, and things like this. And all of these things I learned. Eventually, I spent the next 10 years writing. Wrote 13 novels across that time, working a graveyard shift at a hotel. And eventually I sold my 6th novel. Got an offer on it from Tor Books. And my wonderful agent is sitting here on the front row. And say, raise your hand, Joshua. Hi. Yes, Joshua. Yeah, Joshua. Joshua was pretty awesome, but he didn't sell the book. I sold it on my own. And when I got the offer, I called up Joshua and said, hey, do you want to be my agent? I just got an offer. He said, well, I think that would be a good idea. And then read the book. And he also said, hey, you've got an offer at hand. We should take this and shop it to other publishers as well and see if we can drive the price up. And I said, but our offer's from the publisher of The Wheel of Time. You're just going to say yes to them. And I don't think he's ever quite forgiven me for that. Because his job is to take the books and try and get as much money from as possible. But I had an offer from Tor Books. This is the people who published The Wheel of Time. I said yes with very minimal negotiation because I wanted to be where Robert Jordan was. And then I started writing books and publishing books. And in 2007, Robert Jordan passed away. This was an emotional event for a lot of us. He'd been so positive on his blog. And one day, everything was good. He was upbeat. And then another day, he was gone. And, I didn't know how to respond. I didn't know what to say. It actually took me a week to even gather any thoughts about what to say. I put together some of my thoughts and I just wrote a few paragraphs on my blog. I felt a little bit, too late because everybody else had already written everything that could be said. But we lost a great man that I had never been able to know. I'd seen him once at a convention. I considered him a mentor. I studied his books to learn how to write. I'd sent him my first book. We later found it at Harriet's house. I think everyone sent their first book to Robert Jordan. A little bit after that, I woke up one morning and checked my voicemail, as I am prone to do in the mornings. And I say morning, it was like noon. I didn't become a writer so I could get up like the rest of you people. I still write until 4 a.m. and then I get up whenever. So I checked my voicemail and there's a voicemail that says, Hi, Brandon Sanderson. This is Harriet McDougall. I would like you to, I'm Robert Jordan's widow. I would like you to call me back. There's something I want to talk to you about. Yeah. I'm going to let Harriet tell some stories now about what was going on her side.
Well, after my husband's funeral, I had a friend staying with me who'd come down and was hanging around to help me. She loved fantasy and she was much happier on the internet than I am. I am something of a closet Luddite. Anyway, she printed out Brandon's beautiful eulogy and put it in front of me and said, "You need to read this." And I did, and I thought, wow, the feeling for the books and for my husband's work is just what I would like to see in whoever is going to finish the series, because my husband had made it very clear he wanted the series finished, and spent his last weeks and months dictating into a tape recorder details and scenes. The epilogue in this book is pretty verbatim, his words, and other material in the book is too. So I thought, okay, well, I called Tom Doherty, with whom I've worked. I was original editorial director of Tor, so I worked with Tom for like 40 years, and I said, "Tell me about Sanderson." That was the wrong question, because he's a publisher. So he says, "Well, his sales on Elantris were this." And I said, "I don't want numbers, that's not what interests me. I'm an editor." And he said, "Okay, I'll send you a copy of Mistborn." So he did. And I read 47 pages of Mistborn and fell asleep. But for an editor, this is a good sign. This is not a complaint. I cannot go to sleep if the book I'm holding, if the story's in trouble. I either have to stay awake until I figure out how to fix the damn thing, or else throw it across the room because it's beneath contempt. The story was okay. Brandon was doing it. And I woke up and everything was clear. The world, the conflicts, what they ate, the people. And I thought, damn, this guy can do it. And I called Doherty, and he's also worked with me for 40 years. And he said, "You haven't read the whole thing in 2 days." And I said, "No, I don't need to." He said, "This is an important decision. Don't you think you ought to?" And I said, "Well, if I were hiring him to write a Sanderson novel, it would be, but I'm not. I'm hiring him to write a Jordan novel." And the important words were unspoken, "and I've got the whip hand." So anyway, then weeks went by. I talked to the British publisher. I talked to an editor in New York whose judgment I trust. And at the end of that, I thought, Provo, Utah, Sanderson. Provo, Utah must be about that big. So I called information out there, and I got the number for Brandon Sanderson. And I called, and a woman answered the phone. I said, "Is this Mrs. Sanderson?" She said, "Yes." And I said, "Well, this is Harriet McDougall. I'm Robert Jordan's widow, and I'd like to talk to you about, I'd like to talk to your husband about perhaps whether you'd be interested in finishing the Wheel of Time series." She said, "I have no idea what you're talking about." Turns out there are 2 Brandon Sandersons in Provo, Utah. And the other one is a wrestler. So at that point I said, "Harriet P. McDougall, you've been a professional in this lunatic business for 40 years, 50, and why didn't you call Tor to get his number?" So I called Tor and got his number and got his very own answering machine and left the message. And, "Hi," and then when we spoke, I guess, it was, we're developing a short list of people who might be interested in finishing the Wheel of Time. Would you be interested? I never told him how short the list was. So anyway.
Yeah. So I just got this voicemail I tried calling the number back, actually, originally, and Harriet had gone out to get a massage, and so I couldn't get her. So I called my editor, and he didn't answer, which is not surprising because Moshe never answers his phone. So I called Joshua, and Joshua always answers, and Joshua didn't answer. And so I walked up to my wife and upstairs, and I said, Robert Jordan's widow just called me. And I was like, what? What does she want? I said, I don't know. When my wife and I got married, we each required each other to read a book. She made me read The Blue Sword. Any Blue Sword fans out here? Yeah. I forced her to read Eye of the World, which she'd already read, but I made her read the whole series. And so I got the better. So she was familiar with Robert Jordan, she says that day people asked me how I felt that day, what it was like. I don't know if I can describe it, right? Because on one hand, I had consciously decided not to put in any application for this because I didn't want to be like the authorial version of like an ambulance chaser, right? I didn't want my first response to be, Robert Jordan has passed away, what can I get out of it? And I decided not to. In fact, one of my friends did send in an application, one of my writer acquaintance friends, but I did not. I had consciously decided not to. And so it's like, suddenly this thing had happened. My wife says she's never seen me as nervous as I was that day. And she actually says I'm more nervous that day than I was on our wedding day. And she says that's somewhat jealous. But I had months to get ready for the wedding, right? This just came out of nowhere. And it's a really weird mix of emotions. Because on the one hand, it's like, I mean, you could call it like winning the lottery, but it's not because the lottery is just money. Who cares about that? This was a chance to be involved in something that had meant so much to me from the beginning, right? This was like, being offered to take over Lord of the Rings for people who had been reading fantasy back in the 80s. This was my Lord of the Rings. There was nothing as instrumental as this in my development as a writer. But at the same time, the only way that this could happen for me was because my favorite writer had passed away. And so it's like, suddenly you inherit something wonderful, but it's because, some relative you love has passed away. You can't, those emotions just don't make sense. They conflict with each other. But I did say yes, somewhat nervously and stutteringly. I could barely get the word out to Harriet. And then she wanted more time to think, so I went on book tour for a month, like not knowing if I was actually going to do this or not. At the end of it, she did call me back and asked me if I would be willing to do it. And I said yes, because by that point I'd realized something. I'd realized that no one could do this series justice but Robert Jordan. But if he couldn't do it, I wanted to do it as a fan to make sure it didn't get screwed up, right? And so I did say yes. And so then I called up Joshua. Sorry, I'm making fun of you, Joshua. I rarely get to do this. And so I called up Joshua and I said, she wants me to do it. And he's like, great, well, we'll see what the terms are. And I'm like, no. We're going to say yes. And Joshua's like, well, we can argue on this point. I'm like, no, Joshua. We say yes. And so I don't think he's forgiving me for that one either. I don't ever let him do his job. I let him do his job occasionally on other things, but on this I was not going to take any chances. There was no negotiating. It was like, here we get the contracts. I had them signed in like a week, and then I was in Charleston getting the materials. And the materials, it's hard to explain this to you guys because what I was handed is in some ways just massive, like incomprehensible, and in other ways it had so much work to do on it that it really got the writer in me excited, and that's a weird way to put it. But let me try and talk you through it. On one hand, I was given a CD with a whole bunch of files. These were Robert Jordan's notes to himself. And he kept his own interesting filing system. There's like folders. I've never been able to make sense of it. There's like folders embedded in folders with like one file in it, and this file is like a list of names with numbers next to them, but I don't know what the numbers mean. When we first went on tour, Harriet said, well, there's more words worth of information in those files than there are on the entire series combined. And I just took her word on it, because there's just tons of files in there. But I eventually did decide, I'm going to figure out if that's true. I'm going to figure out exactly how many words there are in this. And so I went through in Microsoft Word and started adding all of these together into one file. All of his files, and there's hundreds of them in there, right? And just adding them, all the text together in one file. And when I got done, I hit count the words. And at 32,000 pages, Microsoft Word said I can't count any further. And it was somewhere around 5 million words. And it was still counting. And then my computer crashed. So for reference, the entire series together is 10,000 pages. And including what I've done, around 4.5 million words, I think. So yeah, there's a lot in there. And that CD full of information, I realized early on, as did Robert Jordan's assistants, that this was not something that I could really work with a lot. This includes like all sorts of esoteric things, like here's a timeline for book 3 with these characters, and here's a list of names from this part, and here is, there's one file on, here is how you make a flag, heraldry, here's how you do this, and stuff like that. Fortunately, the assistants had compiled out of that 200 pages, which they printed off, of notes for the last book. And this was the gold. The rest of the notes, we kind of turned turned Maria and Alan, Harriet's assistants, Robert Jordan's assistants, into kind of personal research librarians. That I would ask a question, and then they would go dig in these notes and come back a few weeks later and give me a stack of pages saying, here's what we found. I took the 200 pages, and the 200 pages were scenes that he'd written for the last book, were part of them. All of these dictations he'd done, which were probably about 100 pages out of that 200 pages, were the things he dictated. And some were scenes that he dictated just in their entirety. Some were scenes he talked about and said, well, this happens, and then here's a paragraph that's supposed to really be a sequence of a number of chapters. And then the rest of it was Q&As with his assistants, where they'd say, so tell us what happens to this character. Or tell us where this character ends up. And they would record that, and then they gave that to me. And so I took these 200 pages, and over the next 6 months, I reread the entire series, taking copious notes, and took these 200 pages and took the scenes out of them and built an outline. And as I said, this was actually really exciting for me as a writer, because part of my worry on working on this would be that there wasn't enough done, that it would have to all be me. That was a big fear of mine. Fortunately, I'd heard that Robert Jordan had finished the last scene himself. But another big fear of mine, honestly, was that it would all be done, and that all I would be doing would be kind of a copy edit, which I shouldn't have, but that would have been better for the book in the long run. But that means that I wouldn't have had much to do. I would have been copy editing. And it was actually pretty awesome for me, because it was in between those two. We had big touchstone moments that Robert Jordan had done that were very important to the series, such as the epilogue. But there was enough for me to do as a writer that it became a really engaging and exciting and wonderful experience, where there were places where I could say, hey, here's this thing I've been wanting to see in the Wheel of Time for 12 years as a fan, or 15, or whatever, since the beginning. And now I can put it in, and now there's a place for this. And my writerly instincts say, we need to have something here, and all of this. And so it was a wonderfully creative, fantastic process where I learned a ton. It's like I got to stroll into Da Vinci's workshop right after the master had left, and I was the first one to touch all of the projects he'd been working on and see what he'd been doing and take them and finish them and be involved in them. It was an absolutely marvelous experience. And that's what I've spent 5 years doing, is putting these together with my whole goal all along to get to that ending chapter. It's the epilogue right now, but I didn't know if it was an epilogue or a chapter or what. And trying to maintain his vision for the series as I did so, while having a blast doing it. And that has been my experience of working on the Wheel of Time. We're going to actually go ahead and do a Q&A now. I wanted to lead with that story, just partially because that's the one that people ask the most often. But also because I wanted to give you guys a frame of reference. This has been a wonderful experience, and there's nothing that's paralleled it in my entire life. But it's weird because it's over now, and it's done. And you guys are having this experience as you're reading the last book. It's now done. This thing has been such a part of our lives. So I'm curious what you guys want to ask of us. We have people with microphones. Raise your hands up. They will come to you. They will choose you. And just when you have a question, raise your hands, and we will go ahead and let you ask. It can be for me or for Harriet. There's a whole bunch of hands up, guys. Just.
How's it going, guys? First off, for Brandon, I gotta say hi from Laura Johnson. That name is supposed to mean something to you? Okay.
Yeah.
She says hi.
Okay.
I'm supposed to give you a hug, but I don't.
Okay.
Just starters, I've been following you for a while. Orson Scott Card gave me a copy of Elantris when I was taking his workshop at SVU, and I've loved your work ever since. But as I've been reading these last 3 books, I've noticed your style, and it's hard to tell what is yours and what is Mr. Jordan's, but I feel like your style has kind of meshed with his. Do you feel that with your books? Like your style is kind of taking on a life of his and vice versa?
There are definitely certain things I've learned from Robert Jordan. And I would say that my style has been influenced by working on these. But at the same time, in these books in specific, I've tried to adapt my style so that it isn't just my style, so it feels more appropriate to the Wheel of Time.
Hi guys. First, thank you very much for coming out, and thanks a lot for finishing this series. I was one of the guys who started reading it way back. So, first, thank you very much. The question that I had was was put to this by my wife, who's I've been with for about 5 books at this point. And she actually tracks the marriage by the number of books that have come out. I don't know what we're going to do from this point forward. So. But what you told me that I had to ask you, under threat of extreme pain at home, was did your wife, it's 5 years you doing this, is that what you said, I think? Did your wife remember what you looked like when you got done?
My wife has been fantastically supportive. When this happened, we sat down and I said, this is going to be busy. This is going to take a lot of time. But at the same time, I have the advantage of, number one, I work from home. And so I'm always around. My brain's not always around, but I'm always around. And beyond that, I don't have a commute, I don't have any of these things. And so I often can work 12-hour days, but those 12-hour days include, the 4 hours off between 5 and 9, and then I just go right back to work. And so I actually spend quite a bit of time with my family. I just don't spend time playing video games or watching TV or things like that. And that's really what this has demanded of me. But yes, I don't know. Yeah, my wife has been amazing. And you guys owe her a lot. For instance, she's at home with a newborn right now while I'm on tour. Yes. Yeah, the baby did not come at a convenient time. But I was there for the birth, so that's good. But yes, she is an amazing support to me.
Entertainingly, I finished book 11 this morning and found out this talk was happening about 3 hours ago. So I'm fine with spoilers. what is the character with whom, or the scene with which you did take the most liberties as your own gleeful fan of an author?
Oh, good question. And you did remind me. I do want to say, let's not ask any spoiler questions.
Thank you.
You can ask them when you come up to get a book signed from us, but let's not ask them to the crowd. When I it was a little bit selfish of me, but I did, after doing my big outline, go to Charleston and say, hey, we need another Asha'man viewpoint in the Black Tower. And I sure would like to have a blank slate character that I can just make completely my own. Is there an Asha'man you guys think would be appropriate for me to just take over, someone who hasn't had a lot written about them that can be mine? And that was a little bit selfish of me, but I wanted to have a character, and I felt it was appropriate, because, yeah.
It wasn't selfish.
I felt it was appropriate because the Wheel of Time, partially, one of the big themes is taking minor characters and then showing you that they have a life too, that they had all these things going on, and that's, the Wheel of Time is about all of the characters in the world itself. But I did want to have one character that I could just do anything I wanted with, and they came back with Andral and said, we don't know what Robert Jordan's planning to do with this character, if anything, so why don't you just take him over? And I did. So Andral was completely mine, and I took some liberties with Andral, doing some stuff with the magic system that I, as a fan, wanted to see done for many years. The fun thing about Andral is, while I was plotting his arc, Harriet sent me, just coincidentally, this manila envelope which in it had a big stack of papers about leatherworking. And she said, my husband had been planning to put this somewhere in the book. We don't know where. But it would really mean a lot to me if you could find a way to put a leatherworker into the novel somewhere using these materials. And I said, perfect. And that's how Andral became a leatherworker.
Wow.
Thank you again for coming. The question I have is when somebody pledges his or her soul either voluntarily or involuntarily to the shadow, are they reborn as an agent of the shadow?
I do not believe that they are. Now, if someone is transmigrated by the Dark One into a new body, that's something different. Like when, Shamael became Moradin. But no, I don't believe that they are. But Robert Jordan perhaps said something different. Anything that I say, I'm basing off my understanding of the notes and things I've read. And at times he has said things in interviews that aren't in the notes. So at any time, anything Robert Jordan has said trumps what I say. But that I'm fairly sure of.
And remember the 38,000 pages.
My name is Jason. I've been a junkie. I've been a fan since book 5. Thank you, everybody. First of all, your timing actually was perfect for me. I also have a newborn at home. My wife is gladly home with our 6th daughter. So
6th daughter?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
For punishment. But the timing actually worked perfectly, because otherwise, I think the original timing would have had you here while we were at the hospital. So,
Okay.
This is actually a follow-up question. I was at Robert Jordan's last signing here in Philadelphia for book 11. And at the time, we just learned some of the secrets of how Quendiara was created. And the question I asked basically told us that it was physically possible to create chainmail out of Quendiara. I did not get to ask the follow-up question is, why haven't we ever seen any armor or any other defensive or offensive devices made from Hearthstone?
It's an excellent question. And I would think that eventually those sorts of things would happen. The problem is that how to create it is not necessarily widespread enough yet. That it's
Historically.
Oh, historically. Historically, I don't know. I would assume that they would have done that, but I don't know. It doesn't say specifically in the notes why they haven't, and Robert Jordan probably would have had an answer for you, but I unfortunately do not. It could be in the 32,000 pages. But you got to remember, the 32,000, a lot of it are notes Robert Jordan made to himself to remember things like world building wise and stuff like that. It doesn't include always the detailed information like that you want to know. It includes more stuff like, remember this is what we said here about this thing, and this is what we said here about this thing.
Thank you.
I noticed as a writer that you like to put your characters in miserable situations. So I was wondering, what is your favorite in A Memory of Light?
Miserable situation. I would say my favorite miserable situation. It's a tie between two. One is right at the end of the chapter called The Last Battle. If you go look there, there's some miserable situations. There's another a miserable situation with a certain character who, that I love to put in as miserable situations as possible, who is in a garden at night and is made embarrassed.
Hello.
Hi.
Thank you for coming here. I am, unfortunately, I know this is a Wheel of Time thing, but I'm not a Wheel of Time fan. I tried reading it once, and when I got to the book that said it spans 2 days, I got a little tired. But I'm rereading it now, and I'm on Eye of the World, and I'm actually rather enjoying it. And now I know that I have Brandon Sanderson books to look forward to at the end, and I'm giddy. So, because I have been a fan of yours for years and years, and I am dying to know how you have managed to keep the essence of your books, the books that you have written during the time that you've been writing these Wheel of Time books, how you've managed to write anything else. Way of Kings, Emperor's Soul. I'm in love with these novels, and yet I don't know how much crossover there is, but they still have your amazing flair. And
thank you. I write compulsively, and the way that I take a break from writing is I write something I'm not supposed to. And this is actually essential to my process, I've come to find. That in between books, or in between sections of the book, I often will need to jump and do something else to refresh myself, to keep myself from getting burned out. And a lot of these smaller projects, like The Emperor's Soul, that you see are things where I'm like, I need to take a short break for a while, and I need to do something else so that when I come back, I can come back feeling refreshed and excited about the project again. And as for how I did The Way of Kings, I'm crazy. I will never repeat working on 2 books of that size, because I did it while I was working on Towers of Midnight, and that was insane. And that's why I didn't do Way of Kings 2 between Towers of Midnight and A Memory of Light, because I said, wow, I was crazy, we're not doing that again. And that's why I went straight on to A Memory of Light. Way of Kings is very special to me, because I started writing on that book. That's the failed book I tried when I was a teenager. I started writing on that, and then years and years later, I tried it again. And it's the last book that I wrote before I got published, and it still wasn't good enough. I wasn't up to writing it. And it was the 3rd time that I tried it, which after finishing Gathering Storm, that I really feel my skill was up to writing that book. I'd learned things, I'd figured out what to do, and I kind of had to write it right then, because it all clicked into place. I'm like, wow, I can do this book now. Fortunately, I had finished a complete draft of it in 2002, and so writing the new draft, even though I started over from scratch, was a lot faster than writing a book that length would normally be. It only took me about 6 months, which is an amazingly fast time for a book of that length, but it's because I had spent 18 months writing it years and years ago. But even doing that, I'm like, wow, I'm never doing this again. And that's why you don't have Way of Kings 2 yet. I'm sorry. For those wondering, I am hard at work at it right now. Tor has it scheduled to come out in November. We'll see if I get that. But I am working on it. It will be my next book.
Hi, my question's for Harriet. First, I just wanted to say thank you for picking Brandon Sanderson and for all that you've done. It couldn't have always been easy, so I just wanted to say thank you for that. And I wanted to ask, how, especially as an editor, how has your process working with Brandon Sanderson been versus maybe working with like your late husband or working with other authors? Have you been more involved because of this unique nature of writing these books? Just kind of was curious how things work for you from your end.
Well, first, thank you for your kind words. And yes, I was more involved. I've known these characters very intimately as an editor for 23 years now. And with my husband, I gave him what I used to call curbside edits. He would bring me in a chapter at a time in the evening as he came slouching in the back door for dinner, and I'd look at him as he's slinking around the wall, and I'd say, "You've been writing Pad and Fane, haven't you?" And yeah, he said, "How did you know?" But anyway, I wouldn't bother him unless something was really serious. I remember in one of the books I said, "Honey, you've got 3 chapters that are nothing but talking heads. Can't something happen in here?" And he said, "Yeah." And he did fix that. Somebody dies. And it's perfectly splendid what he did. But other than that, and I only brought that up because I thought it might affect the future writing. He worked out this grand way to do it. But generally, I waited until the very end to give him my edits. In the beginning, it was not that way. But by the time we'd worked on all these books together, he knew everything that drove me nuts. He didn't do those anymore. And I think I've answered.
Well, and how's the process been now working?
Oh, with Brandon.
Yeah.
Well, it was working with a new writer in this world that I knew very well. So yeah, it was more. It was more like working with my husband on the first Wheel of Time book. And in fact, Brandon, do you remember I gave one of the original working pages from The Eye of the World to a charity auction, and Brandon saw it and said, "I can't believe that. Harriet did the same thing to me."
Yeah, I dug up the page from mine. It's funny, she'd done an edit to Jim, and it's a simple line edit that's so meaningful though. It was like, I had written, "He noticed that she was wearing this," or something like that, and Harriet crossed out he noticed, because you don't need to notice that, you're noticing it by writing it. It was actually the exact same 2 words of mine she crossed out that she crossed out of Jim's. So I gave that sheet to the same charity. Hang them side by side. So the authors, editors for years have been forcing us authors to write better prose.
And I told the guy, I said, "Be sure to frame it with museum quality glass because red pencil fades."
It was really interesting working with Harriet, because on all the books I'd done before, I know the characters better than the editor. Not with these. I mean, I know these characters well, but Harriet knows them better than anybody. And so, I'd never had an experience before. Like, I wrote an early chapter for Avienda, and I sent it to Harriet. Never had an experience like this before, but when I met with her, she said, "Oh, Brandon, you wrote an almost perfect Elaine in that chapter." And I had done the wrong character, but, an editor normally can't do things like that. As good an editor is, they can say, "Something's off about this character," or, "I feel like this character needs to be fleshed out." They don't know the characters as well as you do because you're coming up with a story. And in this case, Harriet knows them better than anyone. And it was actually really a treat to work with Harriet on this, because having an editor who could be that in control was wonderful. You'd think it'd be frustrating, but it wasn't, because, doing what we were doing was a scary thing. Finishing the work of such a grand master of the field was terrifying. And having someone who could say, "Here's where you're off," was really, really relieving. And having someone who actually could go over all the prose and kind of blend it together, so that places where I inserted Robert Jordan's prose and then wrote the rest of a chapter, Harriet's touch on the whole thing could make it feel right. That's a really special thing that I don't know if you guys appreciate to its fullest, how much better these books are because we had Harriet.
Thank you.
Hey there. Actually, I wanted to start off by talking about what you said about Andrew. I was really impressed with what you did with him, and actually I'm not at all surprised to see that you kind of took control of his character. Because what you were doing with the magic system sort of reminded me a bit more of what you did in the other books, where you were twisting it around on itself. But not related to what I wanted to ask. What I was going to ask was, with the when you were going through and outlining everything, you know, we eventually got the announcement that this was not going to be a 12th book, it was going to be 12th, 13th, and 14th book. So, at what point did you realize that that was going to happen, and how did you feel about breaking it up so much?
That's a good question. When I started working on it, one thing that I took to heart was that Robert Jordan had been telling people for years that this book would be so big that they'd have to invent a new type of binding. He actually said that, and they'd have to sell like wheelbarrows with it to get it out of bookstores. And I, as a fan, took that to heart, and I said, this is going to be the biggest book ever written, if I can help it, and if I can make it so. And I plotted it out at 800,000 words as a single volume. And knowing that I usually go over what my plot says, my outline. And so I said, okay, 800,000 words, they're going to find a way to put this out because I'm going to write it that long. But a little voice in the back of my head said, you know they're not going to let you do that. There's no way they're going to let you, because 800,000 words is just like unpublishably big. But I said, well, it's what Robert Jordan wants, I'm going to do it, and they'll figure out what to do. And once I got through all of what became The Gathering Storm and about a quarter of what became Towers of Midnight, I was sending in chunks to Harriet, and Harriet was telling Tom Doherty how big it was, and Tom Doherty was panicking, as publishers do, and saying, can we please cut this? Can we please make this? By then I had a plan already in mind, because I knew they were going to. And Harriet came to me and said, can we make this 2 books? And I said, no, we can't. Well, we can make it 3, because I know where the cuts would go.
And we did. And looking back, I realized that there is no way Robert Jordan could have done it in 1 book either. He thought so, but then he thought originally that the series would be 6 books. So he didn't have the best grasp of it.
Yeah, we know the Lewis writer.
Hi, thanks for coming. I was wondering, the 2 prequels that were planned but were never written, is there a possibility of those happening?
No. The thing is, he made it very clear before his death that he wanted the series itself finished. But he had expressed himself very freely about his loathing for anybody writing in his world that wasn't following his own material. He really hated that idea, and he left nothing about the prequels except a signed contract. And for the trilogy of outriggers, as they're called, he left, it's either 1 sentence or 2. I can't tell you what they are, because even in the 1 sentence, there's a bit of a spoiler for those who haven't finished A Memory of Life. But you can't construct a trilogy that has enough of Robert Jordan from 2 sentences. So this is why the prequels won't exist, and neither will the Outrigger novels. I'm sorry about that, but he had very strong opinions about that. He did not want that to happen. And I must obey that.
But tell us about the encyclopedia.
Oh, the encyclopedia. Yes, and you all have to rush out and put pre-orders now. There will be an encyclopedia of the Wheel of Time. I, in a weak moment, signed a contract for this. It had a due date of 2008. But of course, it really couldn't be delivered until the series was finished. And there had been time to assemble the material from the last book and make it a true encyclopedia of the whole series. I figure that it will take me with Maria and Alan until the end of 2013 to get it ready for illustration. And then we'll send it to New York for illustrations to be commissioned. So maybe the end of 2014. And some people have asked, enough so I'll comment on that, this is not simply an expanded version of the big white book. This is a real encyclopedia of the series. Encyclopedic format. I mean, just, it's a whole different animal.
And to head off questions that we're undoubtedly going to get, Universal Pictures owns the rights to The Wheel of Time. They are planning on developing a feature film based on Eye of the World. We don't know when that would happen. They're on the second draft of the screenplay. We haven't seen it. But we're very hopeful for that. I'm being told by the librarian that we have one more question, but after that I'll do a few announcements, and when you come through to get this book signed, you can ask us questions then too.
You know, the librarian does not say ook. He's a very good guy anyway.
Thank you very much. I'm a newbie. My wife, on the other hand, is not. She has been an avid reader for many years. But I have a question for you, with a follow-up question after that. What's it like to be given a treasure trove of information that allows you to get into the mind of the author, you know, for Robert Jordan, for you to see that? Because very rarely do we as writers get into someone that we look up to, what their mind is like and what goes into their stories. And the follow-up question is, when you hit writer's block, did you ever ask yourself, what would Robert Jordan do?
Well, he would probably go smoke a pipe, which I don't think is. Seeing this material was amazing for me for a number of levels. Being a writer myself, there are things that I could see in it that I don't think would make any sense to most people. And I was able to, it was incredible. It was absolutely incredible. And one of the incredible parts about it, which is going to sound weird, was that I was able to say, wow, he did it like me in this place. And like, wow, I can see he was actually a person like me. Like, sometimes it was hard for him, and sometimes he cut out scenes, and sometimes he rewrote them, and sometimes he was dissatisfied and went over and over and over them. And he needed reminders, even though he was a genius. He needed reminders to tell himself, you know, this and that and these things. It was in some ways very humanizing for me to see Robert Jordan's notes. It made me think, wow, maybe some of the dumb things I do aren't so dumb after all. At the same time, it was very inspiring because I got to see, kind of in these notes is a story told from the beginning and how he became what he became. And when I reread the series, I was able to see a lot of that progress as a writer and feel like I was being elevated by it. I've said many times, the biggest advantage that I as a writer have over Robert Jordan is that I got to read Robert Jordan. And I maintain that. My generation stands definitely on the shoulders of giants, and I got to see what the giant was doing behind the scenes, and so it was fantastic. It was amazing. I don't know if I can say anything more than that, because so many things I was seeing are things that don't make that much sense unless you're right there in the mix of it. But yeah, it was an unparalleled opportunity. I do want to give a few little announcements here. I do these every time just because it's important that I mention if there's somebody who has disabilities, that standing is an issue or things like that, please do come to the front, find one of the librarians, and please let us get your book signed first. And we don't want you standing in line. I had a person on crutches stand in line for several hours at one of our signings. So yeah, don't feel embarrassed. Go ahead. We invite you to come up early. We do have a lot of wonderful books for you to buy. We appreciate you buying them and supporting. There's an independent bookseller here selling them, and you support the library by doing that. We appreciate you guys doing that. We do have early Wheel of Time books out there. I won't sign those. Out of respect for Robert Jordan, I don't feel it's appropriate for me to sign those. Harriet will, however, sign them. She won't sign my books. She will sign the Way of Kings, which she did an edit on. And if you happen to have a copy of Ender's Game, she edited that. So she will sign your Ender's Game. And she will sign all of the early Wheel of Time books. If I can give a special promotion, they have another of my books that's brand new called The Emperor's Soul. It came out last year, and this one I'm giving a free ebook copy to anyone who buys the hardcover or the hard copy. It's not a hardcover; it's just paperback, but it's just something I'm doing to try and experiment with. So if you read ebooks, that single one I can send you. You just send me an email and I'll send it to you. So if you've never tried one of my books before. The Emperor's Soul is out there, worth giving a look at. Otherwise, I think that is everything. Oh, photos. Where's our memory keepers? We'll have one of the memory keepers taking your photos if you want to take a photo with us. We will do that, but we really try not to slow down the line taking the photos. So we're not going to do like where you come back around and pose with us and stuff like that. And we just have to do it fast. Because otherwise we'll be here till like 3 a.m. And I apologize for that we have to snap things so quickly, but that's what we're going to do. And we do limit you to 3 books through the line. If you want to get more, you can wait till after everyone else has gone through, and then you can come back through and get as many as you want that second time through, okay? So, anyway, we'll have a memory keeper with the red shirt. If you want to get a photo, give it to them, and they'll snap a photo of us while we're doing it. We'll probably won't even do pose photos. We'll just have them snap while you're going through, okay? All right?